Every single sight above 1x in Battlefield 6 is broken, getting worse the higher the magnification gets. And what's most frustrating is that no Battlefield game has ever worked this way before. And if you're feeling cynical or want to get your pitchforks out, it was very likely imitated from Call of Duty. You may have noticed that sniper rifle flicks to enemies outside of your scope always seem to fall short, and that your target acquisition with lower zooms also falls short or otherwise feel clumsy and inconsistent. And flick shots are kinda my thing, so when I see a target here, I am confident in moving my mouse the correct distance to hit them, but every time I fall short, so what's going on? Well, for whatever reason, Battlefield 6 is now using what's referred to as dual render or picture-in-picture for their sights. Now, whether it's true picture-in-picture doesn't really matter, we just care about the gameplay implications. And this is where the area inside the sight is more zoomed in than the area outside of the sight. The vast majority of FPS games, including every single previous Battlefield game, instead zooms everything in by the same amount. So why is this even a problem? Well, first up, here I am with a 4.5 times scope, and when the head is covered by the housing, we would assume it's still there, just hidden. But when we keep moving, oh, it's not there. It's over here instead. We can see the rest of the body here, and the head should be here, and wouldn't you know it, my flick shots land where you would expect the head to be. The problem here is that the 4.5x scope is about 25% more zoomed in than everything outside of it. So while we can clearly see our target sitting right there, that's actually an illusion. In reality, it's not there at all. You can imagine if we instead scaled the whole screen by what's inside the scope, that it would instead sit out here. So we're led to believe we need to aim here, when really we need to be aiming over here. That's where this mismatch is coming from. The issue is most noticeable with fast flick shots because we move the screen too quickly to interpolate these differences. All that really matters is this screenshot we see the moment before we flick. The rest comes down to trusting we know how far to move our crosshair and when to shoot. And for general aiming outside of flick shots, this discrepancy with expected target location and their actual location inside the scope is what leads to a feeling of clumsiness or awkwardness when looking around in aim down sight or ADS. While we can interpolate and make adjustments at slower speeds, these discrepancies are still hurdles we're constantly having to overcome. So to summarize, the main issue with how Battlefield 6 handles its zooms is that to aim at anything outside of your scope, you have to move your mouse or controller further than you would expect. Everything outside the sight is fake, it's an illusion. If we scale this outside area by the inside of the scope, so it's all the same, that's real, that's the true screen distance to targets. But we are left dealing with this fake, misleading version instead. I went through a bunch of different sites and measured the pixel heights of targets in hipfire, inside the scope and outside the scope to see what's really going on. What I found is that the issue starts off mild and gets much worse the more you increase your magnification, plus a few other interesting quirks. As you may expect, a 1x scope works totally fine. Everything is the same field of view, so there's no problem. But here we have 1.25 with most zooms up to 6x. And what we can see is that we start with only 3% extra zoom and gradually get all the way up to 34%. And the takeaway here is that this problem is less noticeable with shorter zooms and more noticeable the further you are zoomed in. But that's not the whole story, because the size of the sight on your screen is a really important factor too. And that comes down to the fact that everything inside your sight is the true representation of what you're looking at and how you should be aiming. For this reason, sights with small housing are disproportionately more affected, because more of your screen is taken up by this fake illusory information. It's why some of the variable scopes feel so terrible for sniping. The sight is so small while still being 34-ish% more zoomed in than the fake outside, which makes it really awkward to use. But on the flip side, some of the variables like the Mars f1 to 5x are actually my favorite close range sights if I can afford to use them. And that's because it has a large sight. You can use it at 1x without having the rest of your gun or laser sight getting in the way. It's a really clean picture and it still works relatively well at higher zooms like 3, 4, 5x because of its large size. Remember, you're only being affected by this if you're aiming at something outside of your scope. By analyzing these pixel heights between sights, I stumbled upon something quite interesting. I'm sure there's more to it under the hood, but it appears they've applied an FOV modifier of 0.9 to the difference between hipfire and scope field of view. So the area inside the scope uses 100% of the scope's FOV change, while the outside only gets 90% of the way from hipfire to that same scope field of view. And because zoom and FOV don't scale linearly, that remaining 10% FOV gap turns into a much larger effective zoom difference at higher magnifications. All of that to say that it looks to me like this problem could vanish by simply changing that modifier to 1, so everything is the same. Your FOV inside the scope is the same as it is outside. All of the aiming weirdness goes away and it works like every other Battlefield game and just about every other FPS game with good gunplay. I've been trying really hard to play devil's advocate to figure out why they've gone with this dual render setup. It's not realism because that would make everything outside the scope black or your hipfire field of view, not this mostly zoomed in version. For gameplay, I could see an argument that the wider field of view outside the scope gives players better awareness and information, but the trade-off for the damage it does to aim and gunplay cannot be worth it. And should players be granted this extra information in the first place? Is that even a positive to the gameplay overall? In my opinion, it has been done as an aesthetic choice. It provides this illusion of the sight being more realistic because it creates this clear difference between the inside and outside. By making it different, it stands out more. I don't think the gameplay implications were a consideration, and honestly they may not even know about them. And while we're on the topic of scopes, it'd be remiss of me not to mention ADS field of view, which is an option that's been present in previous Battlefield games, but is now missing in Battlefield 6. Turning this setting off would make your sight zoom in as if you were playing on the default field of view. So even if your FOV was cranked right up, a 1x scope would actually zoom in a fair bit. I couldn't find the tweet, but I'm sure I saw Florian talking about this at some stage and that it was an intentional choice. I can see reasons for not adding it, particularly for balancing sights and for red sec especially. And as someone who personally did use this setting in Battlefield 5 and would likely benefit from it in Battlefield 6, I would still be okay with not bringing it back if they fix 3 crucial things with sights in this game. First is the dual render messing up your aim that we just covered, and second is how small the sights are. They are tiny. I don't think there's a single sight that I feel happy about using. To me, it's all about choosing the least terrible one for whatever build I'm playing. The housing is bulky and your gun and attachments block a huge portion of the screen. Bringing these sights and weapon much closer to the screen would feel so much better. Just take a look at the 1x sight from Battlefield 5. You have all this open space around the crosshair, and in particular, this gap between the crosshair and the gun itself. The housing is relatively thin and you have a clean, crisp picture, no weird tinting or lens warping effects. And now let's look at my favorite 1x scope in Battlefield 6. The sight itself is tiny, you have barely any space between the crosshair, the housing, and the weapon. You have this random bulky part here covering things up. There's a blue tint to it, and God forbid you equip a top-mounted laser sight. I mean, come on. And the final thing I wanted to bring up is the depth of field, where the area outside of your scope is blurry. Visibility is already difficult enough as it is in this game, without having most of your screen blurred. Previous games have had an option to toggle this on or off, although in Battlefield 5 I can't really see any difference except for on the weapon. While Battlefield 6 doesn't have this setting exposed in-game, you can turn it on or off in the config, but all it changes is whether the weapon itself is blurry. It doesn't change anything to do with the blur outside of the scope. So to sum everything up, the area outside of your scope is an illusion. Targets are further away from your crosshair than they appear, making you under-aim your shots and otherwise introduce a certain clumsiness and awkwardness to aiming in this game. The sights themselves are far too small relative to the size of your viewport, and the depth of field blurriness outside of your sights makes visibility more difficult than it needs to be. The good news is that all 3 of these problems have been solved in previous Battlefield titles, so if they were to be changed, it shouldn't be too troublesome and the results would be unambiguous. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I'm obviously biased towards aiming, gunplay, and gameplay, and making whatever decisions are necessary to make those elements as fun and robust as possible. But perhaps I'm missing some of the benefits here or some counterpoints that support this new direction that I haven't quite considered. If you're looking to improve your aim, I highly encourage you to check out my very own Clawmate mouse mod I designed over at struthgaminggear.com. They allow you to set up these extra surfaces to grip into, significantly increasing your control. I recently put up a gallery of setups submitted by the community, which is a cool insight into the many creative ways you can use them. Thanks so much for watching, be sure to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you in the next one.